What was the worst wedding you have ever attended? Story 1. At a cousin's wedding, my uncle was smashed and thought he had a stroke in the bathroom because he couldn't straighten himself. It turned out he had buttoned his waistcoat to his trousers and couldn't stand up. Story 2. I was an event manager at a mansion that hosted a lot of weddings, so I've seen my fair share of wedding shit shows. My favorite was probably the one where the entire wedding party started drinking at noon for a 6 p.m. wedding. The groom passed out around 5, and we couldn't wake him up. So I made him a ham sandwich, propped him up in his bed, and hand-fed him. I managed to get him and his groomsmen down to the courtyard, then had to run back in to herd the bridesmaids down. The bride spilled her mimosa all over her dress. 2 of the bridesmaids couldn't find their shoes, but everyone was super happy and nice. There were about 150 people at the reception, and every single one of them got absolutely hammered. The mother of the bride kept sneaking up on me to hug me, and the groom made me pose for some photos with them. They also gave me all the leftover wedding cake and a few bottles of wine. I missed them. Story 3. At my own wedding reception, I saw my wife's grandma, who was about 98, very slowly, and with a terrible sense of inevitability, fall sideways off her chair. She remained in a sitting position, but just slowly tilted sideways until she was on the floor, still in the exact same pose. It sounds shitty, but all I could think was, for fuck's sake, don't die at our wedding. Please don't die at our wedding. Luckily, she was fine and lived for another few years to see her 100th birthday. Story 4. One of my best friend's weddings. The groom got so drunk that he straight up disappeared from the reception. Things got really awkward when it was time for the wedding to be over. The venue was kicking us out, and the bride and groom were supposed to take off in their vintage car and drive to their honeymoon suite. The music stopped, the lights came on, and suddenly, the guests were searching for the damn groom. My husband finally found him in the parking lot, basically face down on the pavement. He helped him back into the wedding, which turned into the most awkward walk of shame past the bride's glaring dad and grandfather. The groom was too drunk to drive, so the bride's grandfather ended up driving them to the hotel suite, about a 30-minute drive. My friend, the bride, later told me that when they got to the room, her new husband passed out cold on the bed. She had to wander the halls in her wedding dress looking for someone to unhook her dress so she could finally get out of it. Story 5. Just as the bride started walking down the aisle, her grandmother suffered a sudden cardiac event. We had to stop the procession and begin CPR right there in the aisle. To make matters worse, we were in a large park, and people calling 911 couldn't provide an exact address. I ran to the ranger station, but it was locked. Desperate, I broke a window screen and crawled through to use the landline, so EMS could trace the call and respond. Unfortunately, she didn't make it. As if the situation wasn't already tragic enough, I later found out that the park ranger had placed a hidden camera in the women's restroom where the bridesmaids got ready. He was arrested and served jail time. Story 6. There was this guy outside the hotel walking up to groups of people in the smoking area, randomly asking how much each person weighed. He was very overweight himself, and his jeans looked like they were inside out. He was also severely underdressed for the occasion, and no one seemed to know him. Anyway, he would ask someone their weight and then excitedly exclaim, "I can bench that." This went on until one guy, who I think was a family member of the bride, got into an argument with him. He started asking around if anyone knew the guy, suspecting he was a wedding crasher. That's when this gentleman decided to cut a deal with everyone. "If I can pick up that bench with my bare hands, can I stay for the party?" Everyone agreed, because the bench was clearly bolted to the ground. So, he walked over, placed his hands on the bench, crouched down, and with all his might, shat his pants in front of everyone. He immediately stood up and waddled off through the parking lot, never to be seen again. Later that night, I heard people talking about some guy who had been outside on shrooms, trying to lift a bench. So, I guess he was also tripping balls. Story 7. My friend got married around age 21. Neither he nor the bride had much money, so the wedding was modest but still very nice. They did, however, have a lovely 3-tier cake. The ceremony went smoothly, and as the bride cuts the cake, music played. She approached the cake with the knife. She was a dainty, tiny little thing, maybe 5 feet 2 inches and 100 pounds soaking wet. If she swatted a fly, it might not even notice. She barely touched the cake and boom! The entire thing immediately collapsed. All 3 tiers somehow toppled over, crashing down right onto an elderly grandmother who was seated beside the ill-fated cake. That old lady, who had barely moved throughout the entire wedding, shot out of her chair like she'd been fired from a cannon, screeching bloody murder and sending cake shrapnel flying everywhere. A close friend and I watched the whole disaster unfold from up close, and we were paralyzed, purple-faced from hysterical, breathless laughter, as were many of the other guests. I later heard the bakery refunded them for the cake because it wasn't up to code in terms of construction. Honestly, they should have charged double for creating a memory that no one there will ever forget. Story 8. At my cousin's wedding. She's the second of 3 sisters. The eldest sister was being her usual attention-seeking, drama queen self. The wedding was absolutely beautiful, just amazing. My cousin, the bride, was the first of the sisters to get married, and it was clearly bothering the older sister. The older sister was also known for being very sexually active with random partners. So, the day before the wedding, while still single and unattached, she came up to me and said, "Don't tell anyone, but I'm pregnant." Naturally, I immediately told my brother-in-law and sister, only for them to tell me she had already told them. After checking with multiple other guests, it turned out she had gone around telling what seemed like everyone. Fast forward to the wedding day, and the bride was pissed. She had caught wind of the fact that her older sister was using the occasion to spread the news about her pregnancy. The tension finally came to a head after the ceremony. During the reception, the older sister, who was a known drinker, got up to give a toast. She started with, "I wish I could have a proper drink right now. Oops. Well, yeah, I'm pregnant."
Ha ha ha.
The bride just sat there, wide-eyed, while the guests gave the most half-hearted round of applause for the older sister's big announcement. Story 9. This will probably get buried, but I have the winner. At my eldest brother's wedding, my mother, since she wasn't paying for the alcohol, decided she was going to get her money's worth. She downed about 6 generous glasses of wine at the wedding supper and then went straight to the open bar. That's when things took a turn. She decided she was going to dance with the, still happily married, father of the bride. But it wasn't just dancing. She started groping him and trying to grind on him to songs like Kodachrome by Simon and Garfunkel and Dancing Queen, along with other ABBA classics. After things got really uncomfortable, I stepped in to dance with her and firmly told her under no circumstances was she to go near that man again, as she was making a fool of herself. She left the dance floor, much to everyone's relief. An hour later, I found her at the open bar, having a tequila shooting contest with some random guy. She told me she had only had 9 shots, but honestly, I have no idea if that was true. From that point on, she stumbled around, slurring insults at people. At one point, she turned to me and asked if I was embarrassed by her. Right before looking at my dad, they had been divorced for over 25 years at this point, and yelling, "Hey, Richard, wanna fuck?" My dad slowly slinked away from the table without saying a word. But the night wasn't over yet. She then started going around the reception, loudly claiming that the father of the bride had sexually assaulted her on the dance floor and that she was going to get him for what he did. Shortly after, she stumbled into the bathroom, pulled down her underwear, sat on the toilet, puked all over the front of her dress, and passed out on the bathroom stall floor, with her panties still around her ankles and vomit covering her. To get her out of there without ruining the car seats, we cut a hole in a garbage bag, put it over her like a dress, and loaded her into the car. To this day, despite over 100 people witnessing the exact opposite, she still insists that the father of the bride sexually assaulted her and continues sending him nasty messages on Facebook. Ladies and gentlemen, my mother. Story 10. My fiancé and I recently attended the trashiest wedding in existence. When the groom went for the garter belt, the bride smashed his face into her crotch and started grinding against him, moaning, "Yeah, baby." A crucial detail I forgot to mention. Earlier that day, the bride had loudly announced to everyone that she wasn't wearing any underwear. Oh, and it was an outdoor wedding with a temperature comparable to the pits of hell. There were 4 separate fistfights. The bride herself was involved in 2 of them. She even threw the first punch in the second fight. After the bride and groom were pronounced husband and wife, All the bridesmaids stripped down to tank tops and booty shorts because they were too hot in their bridesmaid dresses. They did this in front of everyone, then later redressed in full view of the guests after everyone returned from cocktail hour. After dinner, one of the bridesmaids and some random guy loudly proclaimed, "We're going into the field to go fuck. Be back in 15 minutes." One of the small children at the reception, no older than 8, turned to their mother and said, "You, Mom, they're going to go fuck?" The mom just laughed it off, which honestly made us sad. Hillbilly Canadian weddings are a treat. Story 11. My cousin got married a couple of years ago, and I hadn't met some of her family before. After the ceremony, we started socializing, but I noticed my stepdad was visibly upset about something happening at another table. He walked off, and shortly after, the bride and groom came over to say hello. My cousin sighed, then subtly pointed toward a table across the room. "You see them over there? That's my mom's cousin. That's her husband, their kids, and their girlfriend." What? It wasn't until I looked over that I realized most people were avoiding their table, because both parents were all over this third person, while their children sat there looking visibly uncomfortable. Now, normally, I wouldn't care, but my cousin had made it pretty clear she didn't want the girlfriend attending her wedding for 2 reasons. She didn't know her. Their behavior was wildly inappropriate. As if that wasn't bad enough, I later learned something that made the whole situation even worse. The couple had recently lost their youngest child to SIDS, and their other 2 children were the ones who discovered the baby, because both parents had been hopped up on drugs at the time. Somewhere in their completely fucked up logic, they decided that instead of being there for their grieving children, the best way to cope with their loss was to bring a girlfriend into the mix. You could just tell that whatever was going on in that household was 50 shades of messed up, and I couldn't help but feel bad for those kids. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.